and welcome to our webinar, Proving AI Impact, How CIOs Can Measure What's Actually Working. I'm Annie Falcone, and I'll be your moderator today. But before we get started, a few housekeeping notes for you. Slides will advance automatically, and if you want to enlarge the slides, just click the Enlarge Slides button located in the top right corner of your presentation window. And if you need tech help, click the Help widget at the bottom left. We encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget at the bottom of your console. We'll try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or if we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. Please know that we do capture all your questions. So let's meet our speakers. Joining us today are Javier Aldrete, Chief Product Officer at ActivTrak, and Gabriela Mauch, Chief Customer Officer and Head of Productivity Lab at ActivTrak. It's so great to have you both here. Javier, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Thank you, Annie. Yes, my name is Javier Aldrete. I'm a Chief Product Officer at ActivTrak. I've been with the business for several years, and my role is about product strategy, road mapping, priorities, as well as coordination with product marketing and our go-to-marketing organizations, where we deliver a number of solutions for our clients. And we have the pleasure of working with many tech leaders and IT leaders on deploying these solutions. And this is where we're happy to share some of these best practices and learnings.
Great. Thank you, Javier. And Gabriela?
It's very nice to join this call with the two of you. I have the pleasure of working alongside Javier on a daily basis for the past several years here at ActivTrak. And I serve as our Chief Customer Officer, where I support our 9,500 customers who have made the decision to be both thoughtful and strategic about how they manage both productivity and performance. And so I'm looking forward to today's discussion.
Great. Thank you both for joining us. We're glad you're here. Let's dive right in with the challenge facing many CIOs today. AI investment is accelerating, but proof of impact is still catching up. But before we begin our discussion, let's start with just a quick poll question for our audience. We'd like to know, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to AI? So you can take a second and look at what your biggest challenge is. Is it understanding exposure to unsanctioned or risky AI tools? Is it knowing which teams are using AI versus which ones aren't? Is it measuring AI's impact on productivity? Or is it identifying where to deploy AI next, which functions and or processes? So think about that. I want to get moving to our discussion with Gabriela and Javier, but this is great information to capture. So do please send along your thoughts on this. Feel free to use the Q&A. So let's get to our discussion now with Gabriela and Javier. So to start, let's set the context. Many organizations have moved quickly on AI. They've invested in tools, they've made them available to employees and encouraged adoption. But adoption alone doesn't prove value. So Gabriela, from your perspective, why is this such an urgent issue for CIOs right now?
Yeah, I think, CIOs are recognizing, and rightfully so, that AI adoption is very much still the beginning of the journey, right? It's not the first step, because if you've got AI to adopt, it means you've gone through the process of finding solutions and deploying it. But coupled with that, early on in the journey is the AI adoption piece. And the journey gets more complex beyond that. From there, the next question is whether or not people are getting value from that AI solution, and whether or not that value they claim to be getting actually equates to some level of measurable impact. So CIOs are very much responsible for answering that question, making sure that they're bringing solutions into the tech stack that are not just interesting and cool and new, but they're impactful and they drive the business forward and in a better direction. And so for this reason, we're beginning to see more and more CIOs appropriately ask questions that go beyond adoption. Where is it helping? Where is there friction? And where is there additional work that needs to happen to unlock some level of scalable value beyond not just that one early adopter, but that entire team that ultimately can help amount to a level of impact that's appropriate given the amount of money that's being spent on tools like these?
Right. And that's an important distinction that you made, that adoption is the start. It's not the finish line. Javier, what are organizations most likely to misunderstand when they try to prove AI impact?
Well, there are a number of pitfalls, and we'll probably cover a few of them through this conversation. But a common one is, or the basic one that is very popular these days, is equating usage with impact, right? The token maxing, right? They're looking at logins, they're looking at number of tokens burned, and they assume that if they see a lot of that, there's going to be more value, more ROI on those investments. But that's a big leap, right? A high usage may simply mean that people are experimenting, they're trying to learn, they're probably burning through a lot of budget without being the most efficient about it. And so the real question really is what happens between that initial investment and start using the tools all the way to the final output. And there's a big chasm between those two start and end points.
Right. And that's a helpful way to frame that issue, that if usage alone isn't enough, leaders need to understand that middle layer, how work is actually changing. So I want to talk about what organizations should measure instead. Javier, if logins, licenses, and token usage are only early signals, what should CIOs look at to understand whether AI is actually changing work?
Yeah, so obviously that is the first step, but as I said, there is a number of steps after that, and you need to move from, yes, you're utilizing AI, which is the basic first premise, but you need to move quickly into the how it is being used. You need to understand, where is AI really freeing up time or helping have more capacity, where it might be increasing quality, where are behaviors being adopted and becoming common in habits for people versus sporadic use of those. And so all of those things are very important leading indicators, because as we know, outputs will come and will matter, but those are usually lagging and they take time to show up. So if you're not focusing on understanding those leading indicators of behavior change and impact into how work happens, you won't be able to predict the outputs, but also shape the outputs, which is very, very important.
Right. And Gabriela, how should leaders think about the connection between inputs, outputs, and productivity?
Sure. I mean, leaders absolutely have to focus on both. When you have one part of the equation and you resist having visibility to the other part of the equation, your decisions run the risk of being skewed. Input data shows the activity and the effort being put into something, and the output shows the result of that activity and effort. And efficiency is hidden in both sides of that equation. You can adjust both and get a better level of insight into the efficiency, which is really what so many of organizations are driving at right now when they make that AI investment. And so historically, many organizations have put their emphasis on output insights because they can be seen. They're easy to see. How many claims were processed? How many tickets were closed? These are things that we have tracked for decades and something that we're very familiar with. What is less easy to see, or perhaps uncomfortable to see, is the input and the activity that it took to adjust the number of claims processed or the number of tickets closed. But the reality of it is, when we make investments into AI solutions, we're making investments on that input side of the equation. And so now it's no longer acceptable to only track the output metric, because we're making investments on the input element. And in order to ever measure that, we have to have a level of understanding of what that input is today, what that input is the day you deploy the AI solution, what that input looks like 90 days after you've deployed that AI solution, and what that input looks like a year later, whether or not that has truly lent itself to the efficiency that you were looking to gain. If you look at the State of the Workplace report that the Productivity Lab produces here at ActivTrak, what you see here is what happens perhaps when you only measure outputs. And so the emphasis that I'm really hoping to make and can come across here is that there isn't one superior metric to the other. It's a deep understanding and an appreciation for the fact that it's a two-sided equation.
Right. And it seems like, you're getting to this point of, it's not so much did the work get done. It's more of how much effort did it take to get that work done, and did AI do anything to change that equation? And that brings us to the importance of baselines. Many leaders understand the need for a baseline before measuring change, but AI is moving so quickly, and the way work happens is changing continuously.
Mhm.
Gabriela, how should CIOs think about baselines in this environment?
Mhm. That baseline really comes from a CIO's ability to introduce an observability layer into their tech stack. And so by introducing an observability layer into the tech stack that informs the business how work gets done on an ongoing basis, they then have the ability to always have a baseline in terms of how work is getting done. When I say always have a baseline, what I mean is that today's future state is tomorrow's baseline. So it's constantly moving. You're constantly introducing change into that tech stack. And in order to do that, you've got to have the ability to understand how that evolves and changes. A more modern approach is to treat baseline as something that evolves every day. And that's the piece that I'm really trying to emphasize here. And that begs the question, what are CIOs doing today to make sure that they're able to have an ongoing level of understanding of how that work is getting done?
Right. And it really sounds like there needs to be just a continuous record of how that work gets done, and not just a little snapshot in time. So, Javier, how does that continuous view help CIOs make better AI investment decisions?
Yeah, and part of that continuous view need is the speed of innovation, the speed of new tools, and how work is changing because of them. That's why we believe that's very important. We have seen it in practice. And it's because leaders can see, they know what they've invested, and they eventually will see the outputs. But what if the outputs are not what they're looking for? Right? What happens then, right? And that's why you need to understand from day one and continuously the, hey, is the workflow evolving? Are people getting better and more in depth into their usage of the new tools, the AI, and how the AI is giving people time back? Are there still areas where friction remains despite of the new technology, which could be the case if you just try to bolt on AI on top of an existing process without making changes? So the importance here is that you have visibility not only on the new technology, but all work, right? That is AI power, and that is more traditional old school, because let's face it, every one of us is still dealing with a mix of tools from 30 years ago in some cases from 3 months ago. And so it's not only the AI power work that you need to observe continuously, you need to look at all of the pieces, because what might be a great progress in month 3, as Gabriela was saying, by month 6, then you have uncovered 3 or 4 other friction points that are from legacy technology that you need to revisit and see how you can make, evolve, and improve.
Right. And that's such a key point, that when you're measuring, it's not just about proving if a past investment worked, it's helping the leaders to decide where the next investment should go. And I want to shift now to adoption maturity, because many organizations have rolled out AI tools, but that doesn't mean that AI has become part of how the work gets done. Javier, where do AI investments most often stall out after rollout?
I think it's the assumption that technology alone will solve all problems, right? And then you say, okay, if I just give them access and maybe have a 30-minute overview or point them to a video for training, that will be enough. And the reality is that humans are people of, or creatures of habit. And therefore, it takes a while to truly understand and change how you work, change how you operate. And sometimes they try, they just don't know how. So there is skill development needed. They need to really learn how to use, how to work differently, and how to delegate certain work to AI, as an example. But the deeper challenge usually that we observe is, even after you have gotten people to be champions of AI or really embrace AI and get them trained and motivated and understanding the tools, there are still some structural challenges in place, which are process may not have changed, and all you're doing is sprinkling AI on top of the existing processes without redesigning those workflows, and therefore you only get very marginal changes in terms of better performance, better outputs. because you didn't really change the process at the root. And now that our workforce is humans plus AI, we need to rethink those workflows and really think about how do we transform those job descriptions, those tasks, and those workflows.
Right. Gabriela, what does that look like at the organizational level?
At the organizational level, CIOs, this is where the partnership that CIOs have with their peers becomes absolutely critical, because there are a lot of other people sitting in the C-suite that need to play a role in this concept. Many organizations are trying to drive adoption as quickly as possible. And it's those organizations that think that adoption equates to success. Hopefully at this point in the discussion, Javier and I have both emphasized that adoption is only the starting point in that journey, and impact is where the true success sits. But the companies get the most value out of their AI solutions are the ones that recognize the fact that things will break, and that when you introduce a new way of getting work done and you do it quickly, something will break and that work will have to be redesigned. And that takes those who understand the work very deeply, your experts who do the work. It takes talent and skill development. It takes a level of org effectiveness and org design expertise and thinking about how those roles change. And so while two organizations may look very similar today in terms of their pace of adoption, the level of support in the organization that they surround that effort with, that are thinking about things beyond adoption and are thinking more about skill development and work redesign, those two organizations that look the same today will look very different 18 months from now. One will still be priding itself on adoption levels without seeing very much business impact, and the other will be operating in a completely new type of work structure where they've been incredibly meticulous and strategic about the way that they've redesigned that work around the introduction of some of those AI solutions.
Right. Yeah. So, it sounds like the difference is really not only who adopts AI the fastest, it's who can see where adoption is creating value and where it's creating friction. And then they can see where the work itself needs to change. So I want to make that practical. Not all AI usage is the same. Javier, how should leaders think about different levels of AI adoption maturity?
Yeah, so this is something that is very important and at heart a foundational framework in our solutions, which is AI maturity can range from very shallow experimental, right, use, like you're using AI as a search tool as an example, and it's better than Google, but not that different, all the way to deep workflow integration or even automation, right? And so we see this 5-stage framework of maturity of the adoption that begins with exploration, right? Research exploration, maybe very modest content generation, and then starts moving into delegating tasks of analysis or production of materials, to then getting repeatable and embedded in workflows. And that's where you start getting a lot of a jump in output and better performance, is when you really get embedded into human workflows and the agent or the AI becomes an augmentation of the person, right? And now very few companies have made it all the way to stage 3 or even 4 and 5, which 4 and 5 is where people start getting into the notion of semi-automation or full automation with agentic. I know that's all the rage, but the reality is that that's still very early in practice. So, but the 2 points that we want to make is you need to have that model like this that allows you to measure that. But second is that every person and every team will be in different stages of this for different parts of even their workflows. So there isn't a one size fits all of like, okay, the whole org is here. Is developers could be in stage 3 where marketers could be in stage 1, right? So this varies a lot and changes over time per the points that we're making of this need of a continuous baseline reframing of things. And so this is what we see, and we see a wide distribution of that adoption maturity in practice.
Right. Gabriela, what separates this meaningful adoption from a more shallow adoption?
Meaningful adoption happens when AI is embedded into the flow of work. And so that's not to suggest that leveraging AI to rewrite an email or to consult, as Javier mentioned, an AI solution like you would Google isn't valuable, but it can also run the consequence of being disruptive or distraction or something that you only do when it crosses your mind, but isn't necessarily in the flow of how you get something done more efficiently. So shallow adoption often happens when AI is used for isolated tasks on the side, but the real rich, deep adoption that drives meaningful impact on a repeatable and ongoing basis happens when you are starting to embed that in how you typically get your work done. That is where organizations can truly begin to see scalable impact.
And that distinction is so important for CIOs because it really changes what they measure. Instead of asking just who used the tool, they can ask, how deeply is AI embedded in the work, and then what changed because of it. Mm-hmm. And I want to bring in another piece of the CIO's role, which is governance. As AI tools spread across the organization, employees might start using tools that IT has not formally approved. So Gabriela, how should CIOs think about shadow AI?
Yeah, it's a great broadening of the aperture here for the discussion. CIOs are responsible not only for topics like productivity and efficiency, but as they all know, they're also very responsible for topics like compliance and risk. And so shadow AI isn't always a bad thing. In fact, the use of the identification of tools that are being used can really signal a need out in the workforce that was going unmet, that people from the ground up decided that they could find a solution and they could meet that need. And that can be really valuable for driving innovation and productivity, but it can also introduce risk, especially in the world of various models that are being introduced on what feels like a weekly basis, and privacy controls and regulations constantly shifting. And so what we want to make sure is happening is that we're thinking about the visibility we have so that we can immediately identify shadow AI and have the appropriate conversations with the people who have introduced it into the environment, understand the need, and identify whether or not that need can be met with a sanctioned tool, or whether or not there needs to be a discussion about having that shadow AI go through the appropriate process to ensure it can appropriately be in the environment. Again, the message here isn't that all shadow AI is bad. It can really drive helpful innovation, but to not know it and to not see it is a level of risk that CIOs need to be really thoughtful about how they're covering.
And Javier, why is this often one of the clearer AI use cases for CIOs?
Well, in our experience working with many organizations, it's one of those use cases that everybody understands because of the risk involved, right? It's really, really well understood that an infraction or an event of a leakage of data, as an example, into AI is a big problematic event that they would need to deal with. And so that's why it's so easy, and that's where many of our customers actually start there, right? Their journey with some of this visibility. And now, just to say that sometimes they're using unapproved tools because employees don't know what the policies are, or they haven't understood that and they're trying to get the job done. Sometimes it's like Gabriela, they're trailblazers and they're trying to figure out new, better ways to work, right? And so shadow AI is not necessarily a negative. It could be an opportunity in some cases, or it could be a signal that better training is needed. Oh, hey, you're trying to do these use cases with DeepSeek. You should consider using Copilot because that is our approved version. It already solves all these problems with better benefits, as an example, right? So that's what we have observed, that it's a lot of it is an enablement or a training scenario. And in other cases, it's an opportunity to be at the cutting edge of what your trailblazers are identifying that you need to consider approving and go through a security process that vets these things quickly and identify whether it should be approved or not.
Right. So the goal isn't to shut down experimentation. It's just to create enough visibility to enable innovation safely and responsibly. I want to pause for a moment and do another quick poll question. We'd like to know, where are you getting the greatest pressure to focus when it comes to AI? So take a second, choose from one of these options. Again, we're just going to move on, but do keep this in mind. This is great information for us to know. So understanding exposure to unsanctioned or risky AI tools. Is it knowing which teams are using AI versus which ones aren't? Is it measuring AI's impact on productivity? Or is it identifying where to deploy AI next, which functions and or processes? So once again, just feel free to let us know your thoughts in the Q&A. But in the meantime, a common challenge with any measurement effort is that leaders collect data, they review dashboards, and yet they still struggle to act. Gabriela, what helps organizations turn AI measurement into better decisions?
Yeah, there's, a common saying that everyone has heard, which is you can't manage what you can't measure. And so I've flipped that saying into don't bother measuring what you're not going to manage. And so really what I mean by that is upstream of your measurement strategy, you have to commit to managing AI impact, not managing AI adoption. And so if you really keep your focus on the management of AI impact, then what you're going to do is you're going to measure the adoption and measure the impact, and then take action on the things that you need to do so that you can manage the fact that that impact is the intended impact and the sizable enough impact to justify the investments you're making. And so upstream of the measurement is a stacked hands set of decisions at the executive level that this is something you're going to manage. And downstream of that measurement is the same stacked hands saying, okay, now that we can see where we are today, there's a level of goal setting and action planning and execution that needs to happen so those things can improve. And so for as much as we've talked about AI being the beginning of the AI adoption being the beginning of the journey, as you think about measurement, you really have to see the management of those measurements happening upstream and downstream of that process as well.
Right. And Javier, what kinds of decisions can this visibility inform?
Yeah, there is a wide variety ranging from small little improvements all the way to like transformational efforts, right? And so what we see in practice is that people usually gravitate initially to, hey, where do we need better training? Where do we need to provide some support? Where do we need to help users, employees get comfortable with the new tools so that they can use what has been bought from them, basically what has been invested for them. There's another scenario where there is quick savings if adoption is not being realized, and maybe there are licenses to be saved, or there are cheaper tools that do the job for certain roles and you're giving them too much versus not enough. So right sizing the level of tools that people have access to, the models that they have access to, because there are a wide variety of deep reasoning models versus simpler models. And those are what I would call support and work decisions. And they usually start in the journey of adoption and workflow integration. But where really the big transformation decisions are which processes need to be redesigned, which processes need to be augmented, where are there opportunities to automate or streamline certain flows and processes that will gather or generate 2x improvements, not 2% improvements, right? That's the big transformation. So we divide these into supporting the work and redesigning the work, right? And so both of them are possible with the type of visibility that we're discussing. And it's just a matter of where you are analyzing and where are you trying to get the most out of your investments.
Right. And that brings the conversation back to accountability, because CIOs aren't just being asked whether AI is being used, they're being asked whether the investment is producing results that the business can understand. So I want to make that concrete. If a CIO wants to get better at proving AI impact, where should they start? Javier, what is a practical first step?
Well, we mentioned this at the beginning, which is you need to start with a baseline. And that baseline could be before versus after. And sometimes that before versus after might not be possible because you already deploy AI to everybody. So that simple before versus after might not be possible in every scenario. However, you can have other forms of baselines. You can have baselines within a workflow, within a task, or start with a select number of individuals that you know are not using AI deeply. They're just sporadically adopting that. And therefore, that becomes your baseline. The trialers or the experimenters would be your baseline against people that are deeper in the maturity of adoption curve, and therefore are able to compare and contrast where things are going for them and how things are differing in terms of behavior adoption, and how does that adoption change where they're spending their time. Are they getting capacity back? Are they seeing better outputs? Right. And so those are the things that we usually recommend to do that, so that you can start creating, I would call them mini experiments, right, of before and after, or if you don't have that luxury, low adoption versus high adoption is the simplest case that we usually see, and see how they differ on things like utilization of their time, right, time spent on high value activities, as well as ultimate output, performance, quality.
Gabriela, what would you add there?
I think Javier is making a lot of similar points to mine that I think it's really because we feel so strongly about this key takeaway, which is that measurement is not a one-time thing. It's got to be an ongoing thing, because things are constantly changing. And it's not just that the introduction of your solutions are changing. It's that the degree to which people are adopting them or no longer adopting them are happening as well. So you have two different variables that you might have control over how many different solutions you introduce into the tech stack, but you don't have control over the degree to which people are adopting or no longer adopting them. And so again, having that level of measurement on an ongoing basis allows you to understand, okay, is there a shortcoming of the solution that I've chosen? Is there a training gap? Is there does the solution not meet the need? Is it not a training issue, but is the solution not set up in a way that it works? And so this all goes back to the ability to, again, introduce that observability layer into the environment so you can see how those changes are having an impact on your impact. And I think that becomes a very critical element to it.
And that's such a strong place to land. It really just sounds like you need to start with visibility, establish a baseline, and then use that insight to guide action. And we have one last poll question. And I also want to remind our audience that if you have any other questions, please put them into the Q&A section now. We capture all your questions. Our last poll question is, would you like to continue the conversation with ActivTrak? You can get a demo. You could talk to an expert. So there's lots of options to keep this conversation going. So we are coming to the end of our time, and that was such an informative conversation. And to close, I just want to touch on a few of the key ideas that our audience can take with them. So proving AI impact requires looking beyond basic usage metrics. CIOs need to connect AI activity to outcomes, such as productivity, capacity, and cost. Stalled adoption and workflow friction are signals that leaders need to identify early. Shadow AI can be managed as a risk without shutting down responsible innovation. And a stronger measurement strategy helps build the case for future AI investment. And the question is no longer really whether people are using AI. They're using it. The question is whether AI is changing work in ways that the business can both measure and, most importantly, to trust. So as a next step, we encourage you to assess where your organization has visibility into AI usage, workflow impact, and business outcomes. So I think we are going to wrap it up today. Let me just take a look. All right. I think that is all the time that we have for today. So thank you to Javier and Gabriela for sharing your insights. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.